Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Monday, September 16th, and we are starting out week 3 of game music composition. You have now finished out your Angry Bots submissions, both the music and the sound effects, and at this point you have completed all of the assets that are needed for the game project. We have a couple of submissions to start out with today. But then we'll turn it over to the topics of the new assignments for week 3. In week 3, we start discussing how to get the music actually working, music and sound effects, working in the game. We're going to use a piece of software called Wise to get everything set up. So make sure that you have your music and sound effects ready to go. You do have the opportunity to make tweaks and make changes all the way until the end of the month, and getting the music and sound effects into the game will definitely reveal another round of changes or tweaks that might need to be made. So make sure that you have your music and sound effects ready to go to try it all out. So make sure that you download and start working with Wise as soon as you can. We want to run into any sort of technical issues as early as you can, if any. Most people go through the assignments just fine, but since it's a new piece of software, new technology, we want to make sure that we have enough time as needed to troubleshoot any sort of issues throughout this week. So make sure you're going to download and work with Wise. By the end of this week, you will have both 2D platformer and Angry Bots working, fully working, functioning Mac games. When you put the music and sound effects in there, you might realize some changes that need to happen, either in the actual design of the sound effects or the composition of the music, or often it is the mix, the overall volume of the music or sound effects and how they play against each other and how they work against the gameplay itself. So we will be going through those topics for the week. Oops, I disappeared. There we go. So let's go ahead and switch over to our submissions here. Oh, you know what? I did not mark which ones are which. Landry, Patterson, and Shoemaker. Let me make some markers real quick. Landry. Patterson. All right. So as you can see, we have 3 different kind of columns of our vertical composition here. 3 different submissions. Everybody has their own marker indicating who is who. And we have an ambient track and 3 action tracks for this vertical composition. Plus I have 3 stingers down here. So hopefully you took the opportunity to listen to your music in this way, where everything is stacked on top of each other. Again, I'll start out by explaining as a whole how to approach this type of composition, and then we'll go through and listen to these one at a time. Hold on a second. So, as you can see, first off, we have our ambient and our action cues stacked vertically on top of each other. This allows them to play back in the same way that they're going to play in the game. You have multiple cues all set up to play simultaneously. I am going to kind of play the part of the game and mix mix individual levels up and down as we are listening. And eventually, I will bring up all 4 of the faders and listen to them simultaneously. That means that all 4 of them need to be the same length. They need to be in the same key, the same tempo, and the same time signature. So visually, the first thing that throws me off here is that this ambient cue is longer than the action cues, but it's not twice as long. So I don't know if it's a different tempo than the action cues, but this will cause some problems as it loops around. One of the first ways is that when it loops, it's going to wait for the longest one to finish, and there will be a gap of the action cues before the ambient starts over again. Or, actually, the other way that this could loop is, let's see if I can do this. There's a little, like this, where every time any one of these ends, it will immediately start looping. So the 3 action cues are the same length, and so I'm going to guess that is the proper length, but the ambient probably needs to get cut down. And if it loops this way, it gets farther and farther out of sync with the ambient and the actions. So I'm just going to take this down and take a listen to it like that. Well, actually, I'll start out by listening to not the whole ambient. I'll kind of jump around here, but then we'll kind of chop it off there as we stack them up and listen to them together. All right, so we have our ambient, we have 3 action. These are all the same length. This does throw me off a little bit with the level difference between the ambient cue and the action cues. It looks like, at least volume-wise, it's going to be very difficult to hear these action cues against the ambient. And really, it's kind of flipped in the actual dynamics of the intention of the music. So the ambient needs to be at a lower level or a lower intensity than the action cues. The action cues need to come in with more power, probably more percussion, more intensity, to create that intensity difference, to create that feeling of action every single time a battle starts with a robot. So we might be able to balance it around. It depends on the overall mix and what's actually the content of each one of these files. So another aspect is the overall mix. What happens when we flatten all these at unity? We want to make sure that the sum of all of these parts don't overload the master. Let's pull this up just a little bit so we can see the meter levels. So we want to make sure all this stuff doesn't totally make this go into the red. What else? So we need, the biggest thing that can kind of fall apart with these compositions is the composition itself, the note choice. Combinations of chords and melodies playing together. You want to make sure that all of the cues follow a common progression, and then each one of them adds unique instrumentation. So each cue should only contain the instruments that are unique to that cue. There should not be any repeated instrumentation in multiple cues, or else when they play together, it will just stack up. Like if you had the same kick pattern or the same bass line in multiple cues, well, when 4 of them play simultaneously, it's not going to sound any different. It's just going to sound 4 times louder. So, compositionally, we want to make sure we want to avoid clashing rhythms. We also want to avoid dissonant notes. Your chord choice, your melodic choices, your rhythmic choices, we want to make sure that it all fits together as we play them. So, common chord progression, common tempo, time signature, and length overall, so that they start and end at the same time. Each one of them, we're looking for a strong difference between ambient and action. We want to have an increase of the intensity when any one of those cues come in. And we talked about mix and instrumentation. No repeating instruments. That's most of it. I also have your stingers down here. Well, I thought I did. Where did they go? Uh-oh, marker 3. Well, don't want to do that. Thought I named this one. All right, there we go. So I have stingers down here. These stingers should be short impacts that are going to play when these action cues are introduced. So it creates a kind of false hit or downbeat to cover over the introduction or the transition into the new piece of music. So sharp attacks that fade out. These look like a good example. Stronger attack and then quickly fade to silence. I'm going to guess these look like metronomes in there, like they were bounced with the metronome. So we'll check that as we take a listen. So let's go ahead and start out by listening to our first ambient cue. Oh. Did I pause? What happened? Oh, there I am. All right. Let's give it a try. Now, I'm not going to listen to all 1 or 2 minutes of all 4 of the cues. I'll just be introducing and taking layers in and out as we go. All right, so we have a good foundation. We have kind of the outline of a progression. We have kind of a foreshadowing of the rhythm. Get a sense of the tempo and the pace to come. A couple of cool textures with the instrumentation kind of coming in and out of the mix. All right, let's see what happens when we add the buzzer cue. So we got some added percussion, that's good. There's a synth that sounds similar. It sounds like it's maybe playing a different line. Or maybe it's the fact that it's just sitting on the 16th note. So maybe a little bit more separation in the instrumentation between the ambient and the buzzer cue. Maybe it is a different synth, it's just a similar arpeggiated pattern and same frequency range. Alright, let's add in the spider here. Alright, so as you can, when I bring all 3 of these in, it starts sounding a bit cluttered. Feels like there might be some dissonant notes in there, but everything's kind of sitting on that 8th and 16th note feel. Yeah. So think about leaving room for different instrumentation. Some instrumentation might just hit on the bar, some hits on a half note, a quarter note, an 8th note. Well, you obviously have stuff on the 8th and 16th notes, and I guess it's the intensity of that arpeggiated pattern when they all play together. It's hard to create some separation. Also, it's a bit of the frequency range also. Where it's sitting in the frequency range, having things separate out a bit more. Also, these have drums. There's some drums, some percussion. I don't think that mech has any drums though. All right, so stronger, intense percussion in the cues, and just more separation in frequency and like the location of where the instruments are, instead of keeping everything on that 8th note. It almost sounds like maybe it was intended to go from one to the next, because they do maintain a consistency, which would be good if they were only playing one at a time, but since they are stacking in this instance, it just puts everything constantly on that 8th note that kind of stacks too much. The other thing is if I play them all at the same time, it can get quite loud and overload the master. Probably a lot of that is the spider being a kind of an overall louder level than the other ones. But something to consider. So I think you have good elements there. You have a good kind of foundation overall. It's just kind of separating out and creating more room for each one of the instruments so that the player can recognize which one is which as they're playing. And with that more kind of spacious feel, you could start that with the ambient, like create more space from the start in the ambient so that you have more room to stack things up. All right, let's see if that's the metronome. Yes. All right, so those could be good elements of a stinger. Obviously, take out the metronome, but what's going on in the background? Typically, I describe a stinger as kind of having two parts. You have the intense or the impact or the hit at the front of it, a sharp bass drum hit, or almost kind of what I often term as musical sound design. So it's not, you should not use instrumentation from the main composition, or else when they play, they'll just sound like wrong notes, like just played in the wrong place. But you can use musical instrumentation, synths and drums, and impacts and hits and sweeps and things like that. So you need that hit up front, and then a little something in a higher register, a bit more ear candy, just like synth sweep, or could have a drop in there, or this kind of stuff might be good elements as a layer, as kind of like the tail, and you have to make sure it actually does tail out and end. But it definitely needs that hit up front, or else when you try it like this, if all of these things are playing, this just plays in the background. Even level-wise, you can't hear it. Even the metronome is kind of lost. So watch out for it against the intensity of the other cues also. You want to make sure it competes. Now, it wouldn't play when all four of these are playing, but it might introduce the fourth one. So just some things to consider overall. Like I said, a good place to start. You have some good elements to work with, but it's kind of separating and dividing things out that makes it appropriate for how it's going to play back in the game. All right, let's try the next one here. We will start with the ambient cue. So again, a good place to start. It's got a good, like that use of the arpeggiator. Kind of gives this kind of sneaky, creeping around vibe. A little bit of the pace. You got some percussion in there, but it's not. There's still a lot of room for added layers. Got things like the filter sweep in there, so it creates a bit of interest and change over the course of the cue. The arpeggiator could get a bit repetitive, but I think, yeah, there's enough changes in there, things happening that are mixing things up a bit. So let's go over to the buzzer. So, a good amount of intensity, right? We have hi-hats, and more kicks, strong string line, and brass swells. Right? There they are. That kind of growth and build-up. Again, there's good locations or placement of the instruments. The drums and the hi-hat are pretty consistent all the way through. The string line is consistent, but those brass gives it more room to breathe and create some changes. Fits against the ambient. Alright, the spider cue, at least visually, looks a bit lower in volume, so let's see the lower intensity. Let's do this. Yeah, so coming from the strings and the brass, there definitely is a less kind of intensity that's felt through this cue. Maybe it's even the drums or that like kind of. All right, so there's some string line things that are happening there. There's some change to the percussion. So there's some movement in there. I might, add another element, layer to create that intensity. And I don't know if I'm just kind of visually looking at what's happening in the other cues. It just looks like there's more dynamics, more action happening in the other action cues. So maybe find another. It feels this one's more sustained and open than the other cues. Let's see where the mech goes. Although I want to jump back over here to get before all this stuff with the mech. Alright, so I like the production of it. The intensity, I still feel like maybe it's the constant movement of the hi-hat and the strings through this line made it feel like had the most movement to it. Like I said, this one feels a little bit more open and spread out, and I was so maybe just lean into the intensity of this one. Like you're doing some very cool stuff towards the end of here. Maybe it's the intensity of the drums, and having something that keeps pushing the pacing forward. Or bring up the strings in the background. Maybe that's what it is. That's anything that kind of sticks on that eighth note and just provides more intensity. It's almost like turn the velocity up more so that the instrumentation hits a bit harder, especially for the mech. And it will be a challenge because these are going to fit, I'm sure. Everything fits together nicely. Let's bring them all up. Let's see how the mix works. Excellent. So yeah, it all fits. So of course, adding more layers becomes difficult because you can only stack so much stuff up there. But maybe it's just highlighting the most powerful instrumentation of each cue to really push the intensity. Compositionally, it works very well. It's formatted to work nicely and play back in the game. A good amount of layers of instrumentation. There's a good amount of complexity overall. So it's really just playing with what you already have and just pulling out the power of each one of the cues to reflect that action. Cool. I think everything works. Excellent. 3 stingers. Cool. Excellent. So they all have a kind of cool tail at the end after the hit. They have the impact and then some interest after that. Whether it's this kind of drop thing here. Or we got a shaker and whatever that cool kind of vibrating string sound. My only thing to maybe point out, and this would really be listening to it in the context of the music, I do think I hear strings and things that might be also present in the main music. Since they are very kind of quick hits like that, it might be fine. You just want to make sure it doesn't sound like... since these stingers are going to play when the battle starts, you don't know when any of the battles are going to start, and by no means are you guaranteed that they're going to be on beat or in sync with anything. So if they sound too much like the rest of the music, it'll just sound like the notes were played in the wrong place. But short impacts using similar instrumentation might work. So it's just something to test out in the context of the game, that it doesn't sound like just some random wrong note fired off. All right. Excellent work. Lots of good stuff to work with, and definitely put it into the game and check it out. Check it out with your music and sound effects and just see how it all plays together. Referencing Wise with all of this, you can put the music into Wise and set up everything, go through the assignment and get everything set up, put it into the game. And once you test it all out, if you go back into your DAW, make any changes to the music, as long as you bounce out the file with the exact same name and the same format, you can re-import it into Wise, and it will just replace the WAV file. You won't have to redo anything down the line of the setup or the mix or anything like that. So once you get in the game, you realize you want to make some changes. It's very easy just to change the WAV file, and it plays the new music in the game. So something to consider. All right, let's do one more. And starting with the ambience. So very cool texture overall, interesting synths, lots of bass, lots of low end. There's some change through the new added instrumentation. The concern will be the level, the overall level, and the amount of bass, and how much is added, and this in like. The intensity of what's added through these action cues. So let's try the buzzer. So I hear hi-hat, maybe a string or a synth kind of sound, but it'll be a whole lot easier if I bring down this ambient. That kind of sounds more appropriate. Of course, I'm just listening on headphones. Then it's almost like the ambient cue becomes the bass for the piece, and the action cues become the intensity and more of the interesting kind of higher register instrumentation. With the addition of this buzzer, it feels like the hi-hat and the strings have come in, but it almost still feels like it's building. You're going to need percussion more than just the hi-hat and like kick drums. Let's see what happens when we add the spider. Alright, now we get a snare, so that definitely helps with the pace. Now I feel like it's moving a lot more. Watch out with that note. Let's put this back in. Watch out for this note. Kind of rubs against the buzzer till it resolves there. Alright, so that arpeggiated line definitely helps with the pace. I would probably say you're going to need something similar, not necessarily the same thing or sitting on the kind of that arpeggiated pattern like that, but just a little bit more. I wouldn't say the spider added so much intensity as it added pace, like it added a feeling of movement. Although the snare on the 2 and 4 helps. Mac. Alright, so we have a synth line. Just needs big drums, probably. Kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, and so you have like the melodic, well, I wouldn't even call it melodic, it's just kind of the harmonic phrase, the kind of groove to it overall. Just needs the drums. Like these two would work together. And since this one is like 1, 2, 3, 4, so this would, you can make this more of a halftime feel. 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, as opposed to 1, 2, 4. So, yeah, just add the intensity to the buzzer and the mech, particularly. Just watch out for the mix and just the overall bounce and the intensity of this ambient cue. You could probably work on repetition too. Once the buzzer is established, it's pretty similar all the way through. Same thing here. That phrase then repeats throughout. The thing here, right? This repeats throughout. So a little bit of change overall. You could even do like first third, middle third, last third. Just create some variation there. Yeah, let's see how they all play together. Good. It goes over when they all hit at the same time. And I'm going to blame most of that on the ambient. Yeah, so if you took down the ambient a bit, like 3 dB, then all these would probably fit a little bit better. Yeah, so those are the types of things that we hear. Let's do 3 endings. No, not endings. These are stingers. 3 stingers. Watch out for rhythmic. Anything that's rhythmic. Dun, 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 dun. Alright, this sounds like an ending. That sounds like I lost. Anything that is melodic like this, or rhythmic like this, or rhythmic like this. That almost sounds like a sound effect, like plucking strings or hitting an instrument of some sort. But make them, again, the more of the impact or hit up front, the intensity, and the fade out to silence. You could maybe use some of this. Like that, one of those stabs, if it was like, bam, and we'll drop to it. That one just sounds like wah wah, like oh no, you lost. And those, anything like that with rhythm, it'll just probably won't be in time or tempo with anything. So just try it out, play it against the game, or play it against the rest of the music in the game, and see how well it works. All right. So those are the things that we heard for our Angry Bots composition. Good submissions, good things to talk about. All of them have room for improvements and tweaks and things to think about overall. Again, put your music in the game, test it out, see how well it works. Even with me talking about it, you taking the first pass at the music, doing peer review, all of this stuff is still just kind of listening to it in the context of the DAW, but not in the context of the game. We listening to it like this is kind of under a microscope, where we can pick apart all sorts of things that could improve. But in the context of the game, with the music and the sound effects and the gameplay and the graphics, some of the things that we mention might get glossed over. So it all comes down to what is the best result for your project. All right. So if you have any questions, please let me know. We're going to turn it over to the archive now to discuss the new assignments for week 3. Again, you will be using the software known as Wise to work on how everything is going to, how your music and sound effects are going to get into the game. Please let me know if you have any issues or need some troubleshooting to figure out if you have any problems while working through the assignments. Other than that, we'll meet again on Wednesday. Come armed with any questions, or if you want to take a listen to anything. We also have a chiptune composition coming up for this week that will be explained also with the assignments. So Looking forward to next time. Other than that, have a good rest of your day. Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and discuss your new assignments for week 3. Here in week 3, we will be discussing how you will be using a tool known as Audiokinetics Wise to set up your music and sound effects to get them working in the game. So we're going to start out by talking about how you can go ahead and download Wise and get that installed. And then we will switch over to talking about how we can set everything up to get started on the assignments. Now, when you go ahead and download the assignment, let me go to FSO here. So we are here in week 3. There is a Wise overview assignment here in week 3. This is a video that kind of describes and gives you an introduction into Wise. I highly suggest that you check out the video to get a feel of how just to kind of operate and navigate around inside of the software before you dive into the assignments. So you can download the video here or just watch it on FSO. Then we have the 2D platformer Wise setup and the Angry Bots Wise setup. And in each one of these assignments, there is a video that describes the full process of how you are going to set up using 2D platformer and Wise to get your music and sound effects working in the game. So I won't be describing the full process in the video today for the archive, but please make sure you're checking out all of the materials available to you on each one of the assignments. So we want to make sure we're installing and using the correct version of the software. So I'll take some time to make sure we talk about how to properly download the software. We will set up the files in a correct way to make sure that things are going to work properly for you. And then just make sure you download all of the materials for the assignment. We have the actual Wise session. We do not start from scratch. We don't start with a blank or brand new session in Wise. We do provide you with the session that has a few things set up to get you started. So please do not create a brand new one. Make sure you're downloading and using the Wise session that is provided. There is a copy of the video that's embedded in the page, so you can just download and watch it at your own on your own time. And then there is a workflow PDF, which is a series of slides on how you're going to get everything set up. So let's go ahead and talk about, well, we'll set up here things in just a sec. Also on FSO, we have Angry Bots Wise setup. So you're going to have a very similar setup for both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. We are going to talk about both of those. So make sure you are downloading all of the required materials for the assignment. So we will spend some time talking about both of those. Then there is also the chiptune composition this week. Week 3 is mainly focused on a discussion of technology. We talk about the setup and use of Wise and how game audio is set up in this sort of modern day. But to give you a sense of how far we've come, we do send you all the way back to the technology of the original Nintendo. So we do want to make sure you have a composition this week, something to work on for creating music, and it's not just all tech inside of Wise. So to show you how far the technology has come, we do a chiptune composition. And with this composition, you are mainly focused on utilizing the same restrictions from the original Nintendo. We provide you with sound banks filled with waveforms sampled from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And we have you create a composition utilizing the same restrictions that was also available on the hardware. So we'll talk about what was possible, what was common, and after we talk about the Wise setup, we will get into the discussion of the chiptune composition. Again, each week you have the optional feedback and peer review, which will this week for week 3 will be your chiptune composition. Virtual class link, the suggested reading and viewing. There's also a troubleshooting FAQ. If things are all, if you're having issues or challenges getting Wise to work, there are a couple of common questions and answers in the troubleshooting FAQ, so make sure you also are checking that out. So let's go ahead and discuss how you will set things up and get started with Wise and then 2D platformer. So let's talk about downloading the software. So you're going to go to audiokinetic.com, the makers of Wise. And Wise is a kind of an industry standard piece of software that is utilized to make all sorts of different games. It is one of the main tools to actually implement audio. The process of implementation is the process of getting your music and sound effects working in the game. The creation and composition of the music happens somewhere else, probably in your DAW. But once you bounce out all of those WAV files, how those WAV files are going to play back and operate in the game is kind of the domain of the audio middleware tools like Wise. So once you go to audiokinetic.com, you're going to choose Get Wise and download the Wise software. That will have you download the Wise launcher. You probably need to log in to download the launcher, but once you do, it will look something like this. All right, so once you download the Wise launcher, you will go to the Wise tab, and you will make sure that you can install the correct piece of software. Nope. No Wise. There it goes. All right, you'll go to the Wise tab, and you'll make sure that you have the correct version of Wise installed, which is the 2019.1.0.6947. There is already new versions of Wise there will constantly be in the future new versions of Wise that will be available. This is the version that was utilized to create all of our projects. Any version of 2019 will probably work just fine, but if you want to have no issues or errors or messages that pop up when you first load it up, then you can always utilize this version. Or if this version is not available, the closest one to it. So you will go down to install new version. You probably don't need the latest. You can go ahead and open up the latest menu here, and it will give you options to, let's see, will it react properly? Come on, Wise Launcher. Launch me some Wise. latest. Wonder if this is going to extend to when I use Wise. Go ahead and launch Wise here. There we go. You will choose all versions, and you will go to a version of 2019. Now, currently 2019.1.0.6947 is available. If it's not available, then you can just choose another version. I already have this installed, but when you go ahead and install the software, all these checkboxes will come up. Really, the only thing you need is this authoring tool. I have all of these things installed, so I can't uncheck them. But all you really need is the authoring tool. You can uncheck everything else. And even over here, if you can uncheck anything, just make sure it's selected to Mac OS, and you can hit next and have everything install. That will install Wise for you, and it will allow you to open up Wise. Now, let me get things set up here. Let me go ahead and have it launch Wise. Now, when you open up, well, I guess we don't need to launch Wise quite yet, because what we need to do is set a few things up on our desktop. Now, before you get into a session, before you load anything up, I would have you set a few things up on your desktop first. That way you have everything set up and ready to go, and then once we're ready for Wise, then we'll have all of our files available. So, a couple things we should do. We're going to start out by creating a new folder. We are going to title this folder 2D Platformer. There we go. Now, in this folder, we need to place a couple of things. So the first thing that we're going to do is, when we downloaded everything, we got a copy of a 2D Platformer zip file. And when we unzip that file, we get a folder that says 2D Platformer Wise that we're going to put into this folder. This is the Wise session that is provided to you that we need to make sure is going to be available. And this is the actual session that you are going to open up in Wise to work on this project. So we definitely need a copy of that. Then the other thing we need to do is have a copy of the game itself. So let's go back to FSO. Now, a copy of the game, you either have it on your hard drive, or you can go back to week 1 to get your copy of 2D Platformer. So if I'm going to go back on FSO, I go back to week 1, and I'm going to go to the 2D Platformer game composition, which has a copy of the game. Down here, I'm going to did I get that? There it goes. I'm going to download a copy of the game. Wait a second for that to download. The other things that we need, we took a copy, downloaded a copy of the workflow PDF. We want to make sure we have access to that so we can follow along with the slides. We are also going to get a copy of the game, which just downloaded here. All right, something else that helps. These two files need to be next to each other in order for this to work. If you do not have these two files next to each other, it will not function properly. It will add a weird kind of fake version of 2D platformer with a kind of a circle with a line through it and an icon. You want to make sure it's directly located next to 2D platformer wise, not inside of the file or not a copy or an alias or anything else, just the direct copy. Most issues with this project are not issues in WISE, they're issues in file management, and it's most commonly because this folder, WISE session folder, and this application are not next to each other. Something else that will make this process easier, we are going to create a folder called Media, and in that folder we're going to create two more folders, one called Sound Effects and one called Music. And I'm going to take a copy of all of my music files and all of my sound effects files and copy them in here. And this just gives me quick and easy access to all of my files. So I have all 9 of my 2D platformer music files, and I have access to all 18 of my 2D platformer sound effects. So I just have quick and easy access to all of the files. There we go. So, So I have a copy of 2D platformer. I have a copy of the WISE folder. I have a copy of the PDF and a media folder that has all of my music and sound effects in it. This should be the setup that you need to get started. That will kind of drop you directly into the 2D platformer WISE setup video that's available in the assignment. So I wanted to set that up with 2D platformer and discuss how that is set up to get you started. And we will do the same thing for AngryBots. So this structure will be very, very similar. Maybe a couple of extra things. Let's see. So I'm going to create another folder. This one's called AngryBots. And inside of AngryBot, well, I guess I should go on FSO and start downloading a copy of the game. Right here. So I need a copy of AngryBots. So I go back to week 2. And I can start downloading a copy of the game. So on this one, AngryBots, I need the WISE folder. So I have downloaded the AngryBots WISE session folder. I unzip that and drop that in there. What else did we download? The AngryBots WISE workflow PDF. And the AngryBots WISE asset list. We're going to need a folder called Media. Media. And in there, we're going to create one folder called Sound Effects and another folder called Music. And then I'm going to go get a copy of all of my music and sound effects, which I have conveniently placed all together, but you might take a moment to actually go find those. So I have a copy of all of my sound effects. I have a copy of all of my music for AngryBots. And I think my copy of the game downloaded. So I'll drop that in there. All right, so the setup is the same way. Your Wise folders are located here along right next to the game application. I guess one thing to point out, these are the project files that you open up inside of Wise. If you double click those, it will not load up properly inside of Wise. It will give you an error message. It'll say something like this. There's no Windows program configured to open this type of file. So you can't actually open it up inside of Finder or outside of Wise. You have to make sure that you open it up inside of Wise to launch those project files to make it work. Once you have everything set up, this will get you started. Then you can now launch your brand new version of Wise that you've downloaded and open up the project files to get started. Let's see here. Hold on, this is closing. Come on, Wise. So when you open Wise, it will allow you to choose the Wise project session that you need. So let's see if it will actually close down here. Hold on just a sec. Then once you have everything set up, it'll open up, look like this. You probably won't have all of these other files in here. These are all random ones that I have. But then you would choose Open Other. You do not want to create a new session. Then you would go to your desktop and go find 2D Platformer and 2D Platformer Wise and open up this 2D platformer WProj. And that's basically where the videos start and will lead you through the process of getting everything up and running. So I wanted just to point that out to you to give you a good place to start on your way for these 2D platformer assignments. Let's see, is there anything else? We talked about how to download it, installing the Wise launcher, installing Wise, and then setting everything up for your 2D platformer and Angry Bots. Oh, that is a good point. Yes. Okay. In Angry Bots, we had a question. There was a sound effects file that the original files to use. Yes, in all of my sound effects. When you go to do all of the sound effects, let's do this. When you look at the asset list PDF, which is this one, there is a whole bunch of files in here that you will need. There's about a total of 60 some odd sound effects that you'll need for Angry Bots. You didn't have to create all of the sound effects for Angry Bots. You were provided with some of the sound effects. And to get access to the rest of the sound effects that you will need, you can find those in week 2 in Angry Bots sound design. So you've already seen this because you downloaded the file and worked on the sound design, but let me point this out again. There was an Angry Bots original sound effects file that you downloaded, and this contained some of the sound effects that you need. So when you download that folder, when you download this zip file, in it there are 2 folders, one that says to replace and one that says to use. You replaced all of the ones in this to replace folder. You recreated those. That was the Angry Bots sound design project that you worked on. The rest of the sound effects that you need are in this to use folder. Everything else that is listed for the Angry Bots project in Wise when you're looking around and you're wondering where the rest of these files are, they are in original sound effects to use. Now, ultimately, what I did here was I just combined them all together into my media folder. So I took, get all these out of the way. I took all of my files, the ones that I created and the ones that were provided, and just dumped them in the sound effects folder. So you can combine them all together once you're working in Wise. But if you're going through and you're wondering where the rest of those files are, they are in the Week 2 sound design. All right. I think that is everything that I needed to discuss to get you started for Wise. That'll get you into the actual assignment videos and PDFs. The other assignment for week 3 is your chiptune composition. So let me talk about that. We'll download the materials for that assignment. Now, like I said, our main focus in week 3 is technology and a discussion of, a discussion of where the technology is for game audio in the modern day. But to get a sense of how far we've come, we want to give you the opportunity to compose utilizing the restrictions of the original Nintendo system. That music from that era is often known as chiptune music because it was all created on chips, certain kinds of chips. And so this assignment will have you creating a composition. Now, it is a linear composition. It does not need to loop. It does not need to be interactive. It does not split out into multiple files that play together in different combinations. This is just a traditional linear composition, but utilizing the sounds and the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So in this assignment, you are given an assignment PDF. The assignment PDF kind of goes over the assignment and delivery of everything. And I'll be describing this in a lot of detail. There's listening and reference tracks that you can check out. And you're just going to bounce out an MP3 at the end, zip it up and deliver along with a screenshot. But you get a copy of this logic session. And in the logic session, you are provided with 4 tracks, and each one of those 4 tracks has a EXS24 sampler on it, and that sampler has some sound banks that are available. So the main restrictions of the original Nintendo was you had 4 simultaneous voices. You had a 5th channel that was could be a sample channel, a 1-bit sample channel, but a vast majority of the music and sound effects were made with the 4 basic channels. Those were 2 square waves, which were typically your melody and harmony or melody counter melody, a triangle channel, and a noise channel, which was your bass and percussion. Then those 4 channels you can have, these 4 channels are represented with these 4 tracks. You can have as many tracks as you want. You can only have 4 simultaneous voices playing at any one time. Now, there are some restrictions that we don't follow the original Nintendo, namely all of the channels were monophonic. We don't really follow that. We allow chords, we allow polyphony. It's just 4 simultaneous sounds at any one time. And drums count as 1. We'll also kind of fudge on that one too, where like you can have a kick and snare and a hi-hat all hit at the same time if you need to. That would have just been 1 voice. Now, if you want to follow strictly, you can keep everything monophonic, but those are the main restrictions. So you were restricted to the number of simultaneous voices. The original Nintendo could only play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between those sounds very, very quickly. So you can have as many tracks as you want. You can just only play 4 voices at any one time. That's typically drums, bass, harmony, melody, or you could do drums, bass, melody, counter melody, or drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, some combination of those. You definitely need drums, and you definitely need a strong melody. And compositionally, don't think about it in a song structure or song form. Think about it more as describing the scene of what's going on in the game and the changes. Don't write in a verse, chorus, intro, outro kind of structure. Write more of what is it. First off, imagine a game. Often it helps a lot if you just sort of have a kind of game or a sound in mind that you're going for, just to kind of give you a foundation or something to base it off of. And then consider what does it sound like for the hero? What does it sound like for the enemies? What does action sound like, or adventure, or struggle, or winning, or losing, or just all of these different connotations around the game or contexts for the game. That will give you a better opportunity to write for something that will fit more in the context of a game, not as a song. So, each one of our tracks gives you a EXS24 sampler, and that EXS24 sampler has a chiptune folder. So if you go in there and open up where you can select the sounds and go to chiptune, you will find a selection of different types of sounds that are available. Some of these are some good long lists. These are very recognizable kind of sounds, and are all sampled from the original Nintendo or the Famicom system, which was the Japanese release. So a couple of things compositionally that will help. Some people either love this assignment because there's the nostalgia aspect to it. It gets rid of all of the kind of production around it and gets you to very simple sounds, and it really makes you focus on melody, harmony, and the compositional aspects of the sounds. The sounds are so basic, so simple, that you really shouldn't stick too long on a chord, like long block chords that just sit there, don't do anything, doesn't really work. Faster, more staccato kind of composition, lots of movement, parallel thirds and fifths and octave movements work pretty well. Putting an arpeggiator before these sounds and running them with chords or even just single lines, writing melodies off of arpeggiated lines that are sweeping chords up, even like 16, 32nd, 64 sweeps. You'll hear very signature kinds of, or typical types of sounds doing stuff like this. So faster, more staccato movement. Think about action. Think about what's happening in this game, or imagine a particular type of game that you're working towards. So when I'm describing having more than 4 tracks, you can have as many tracks as you want. You can just have 4 of them playing at any one time. And this is a very primitive example of this, but this is generally what I mean. We'll add a 5th track down here. So something like this, where you would do... Come on, Logic. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. So at any one time, there's only 4 playing. Oops. So you can switch and have this changing as often as possible, but just 4 at any one time. So let me take a moment here and play some examples. Let's get this set up. Let's try this. All right, so these are some good examples overall, but it gives a good indication of the different types of approaches here. Let's see if this works. All right, so this is a really good example of kind of storytelling through the game or through the music, where you have different kind of feelings and plot points. So this would be like the introduction of a character, and then they kind of set off for their adventure. And again, faster changes, lots of movement, faster tempo overall, works very well. Again, sweeping arpeggios sound nice. And it changes again. Different sounds are coming in and out. Here, it almost feels like it's an arpeggiated phrase as it moves around. All right, let's try another one here. This one. This is a good example of kind of that fast, really kind of staccato phrasing. Not when it starts out, but it'll eventually get there. About here is when it really switches over. And then we have one more example that probably, these are all really good examples. They don't all turn out like this, but this is the last one here is one that I really had to check to make sure that there was only ever 4 voices playing simultaneously. There was a lot of good production techniques in here. All right, so all of those really good examples overall. I did want to introduce the assignment. Let me kind of go back here. I think I went through everything. So we talked about how to set up a 2D platformer and Wise so that you can get started on your setup of your music and sound effects. We also discussed how you would set it up for Angry Bots, and then we went through a discussion of your chiptune assignment. So I think that is everything that we needed to discuss. If you have any questions, you can post them up in the chat. Stick around for a few after we finish up here if you do have any questions. But also, please reach out to me as you progress through Wise this week. Wise, of anything, you're already familiar with how to use DAWs and all your other software, but Wise is a new piece of software for you this month. So if you are having any issues, please reach out. We can troubleshoot any problems. We can fix anything. If you do reach out, please send me any screenshots or any issues, like error messages that might pop up. That always helps with troubleshooting. Other than that, we'll wrap it up there. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you again next time. Thanks a lot.